Our lecturer in honor of Father Lou today is Anthony E. Clark. Dr. Clark is professor of Chinese history at Whitworth University in Spokane, Washington. He has his doctorate from the University of Oregon, Phi Beta Kappa, magna cum laude, all hail. He writes for our Sunday Visitor, for the Catholic World Report, for This Rock Magazine, for Ignatius Institute, and academic journals. He has 3 books on Chinese history: China's Saints, Catholic Martyrdom During the Qing Dynasty, 1644 to 1911, is expected to appear next year, that is in 2011. You may have seen him on EWTN, and he will indeed be filming an EWTN series this summer on China's martyr saints. He does research in the Apostolic and Secret Archives at the Vatican. Perhaps we should say formally Secret Archives at the Vatican, since almost anyone now I think by signature can get in. He has lived and researched in China, Taiwan, Germany, Italy, and France, and he's presently the archivist for the Roman Catholic Archives of the Diocese of Spokane. And I ask you to welcome our speaker this afternoon, Dr. Anthony Clark.
So the first order of business is to make sure that my microphone is on. Okay, good. Thank you for that kind introduction. It was very nice to hear Father Matthias Lou's biography in such great detail. I'm a fan of his, and I wanted to meet him, but couldn't. He passed away before I had a chance to meet him. And I also want to thank very much the St. Anthony of Padua Institute for bringing me here. In fact, as I was flying into the airport, I was I thought, well, it's my patron saint, partially, who's bringing me here. So I'm named for St. Anthony of Padua, so it was meaningful. And I also want to tell you how privileged I am to talk about Matteo Ricci, especially right now, and especially in this month, because 400 years ago today, Matteo Ricci was dying, and he was on his deathbed, and had an enormous gathering of Chinese officials and fellow Catholics and other Jesuits swarming around his bed, asking him for advice in terms of what should next happen to the church in China. And 400 years ago on May 11th, Matteo Ricci passed away in Beijing. And there were only really about a couple hundred Catholics in that whole region of China, in northern China at that time. And of course, people at that time, especially other orders, he was a Jesuit, especially other orders, criticized Matteo Ricci very much for not bringing more people into the church. And one of the things I'd like to talk about today is the Ricci method and how that was employed and what that meant. But let me say another thing. Just from Ricci's point of view, when we say in the name of the Father and the Son of the Holy Spirit, as Catholics, we say it in our own language, in nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, or in nom du Père et du Fils et du Saint-Esprit. In Chinese, there was no word for that. There were no words for that. And it was really Ricci and Ruggieri and other confreres at that time who finally decided what term should be used in Fuji Zhi Sheng Sheng Zhi Ming in Chinese. Well, my larger point too, just as I begin this talk, is when we think about Catholicism, it is so common. I've lived in Germany, I lived in Westphalia, I've lived in Rome. I work in Rome very regularly, in Paris. Most often I live in China. And Catholicism, we have to be honest, is so very different in every place, yet it's so very similar. And one of Ricci's largest projects was thinking about this question. How do I bring Catholicism, essentially Catholic Catholicism, to a place that is so vastly different than the Western society that he was raised in? When Ricci passed away, there were really probably far less than 1,000 Catholics in all of China. Right now, there are around 10 million that are recorded, and certainly there are more than that. And here's an interesting point that I should make. In 1949, when the communists took over China and proclaimed on October 1st, 1949, when Mao proclaimed that the people of China have stood up and now we have the People's Republic of China. At that time, there were 4 million Christians in China, 3 million Catholics, and 1 million Protestants. Now, today there are 10 million Catholics and 30 million Protestants. The ratio has shifted. And what's interesting about that, I think, largely, is that Ricci thought and believed that when Tertullian said that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, Ricci knew that suffering would make the church grow in China. And as much as I firmly think that the communist regime has been horrible, we must admit that Ricci was right. The church has flourished. In fact, one of the things that is one of the biggest problems in China today for the government is, what do we do with the reality that Christianity is growing faster than any other group? Well, materialism. But other than materialism, certainly Christianity is the fastest growing group of people in China today. And the other thing is that if you live in China as much as I have and you go to Mass there, you really can't separate Chinese Catholicism from Matteo Ricci. He's now officially a servant of God. The Bishop of Macerata, where he's from, has noted that the Vatican, and this is true, is thinking about taking very seriously his case for beatification and possible canonization after that. So Ricci is gaining a new reputation in the world, and certainly in this is, by the way, a Jubilee year dedicated by the Holy Father in honor of Matteo Ricci. So it's very opportune that I'm here. Let me just start also by saying that about this time last year, I was in Beijing at the tomb of Matteo Ricci. And as I approached the tomb, which is now located, interestingly enough, it's called Jialan Cemetery. It used to be the Jesuit cemetery that became the Vincentian Cemetery. That's why Father Lou was able to go to St. Vincent's Seminary, because the Vincentians replaced the Jesuits in Beijing after the Jesuits were suppressed by Rome. And so you have this huge Vincentian presence, but this area in Beijing that was the Jesuit cemetery and later became the Vincentian Cemetery, still most of the tombstones are Jesuit. It is now the Communist Party College. And if you go to the Party College in Beijing, what's very fascinating about this is they've preserved this entire Jesuit cemetery with all the beautiful stelae, and with Verbiest, Adam Skolvan Bell, and Matteo Ricci's tombs, because from the Chinese government's point of view, Matteo Ricci was an ambassador of Western culture who brought science, astronomy, cartography, physics, Euclidean geometry to China, but never in China will you hear him referred to as the Shengfu, Father Li. He's always that Western scientist. But my point now is, before I really sort of read my talk, as I approached Matteo Ricci's tomb in Beijing last year, I passed a group of European a camera crew who were basically producing a documentary on Matteo Ricci, and they were talking about his first map of the world that was produced in China and was a sensation in China. They were talking about him as a contributor to Chinese astronomy. But there was not one mention, because I listened carefully, of him, as I mentioned, as a priest. So the European perspective, at least from this camera crew of Ricci, was very similar to the official Chinese point of view. Matteo Ricci was an ambassador of culture and an intellectual contributor to China in terms of its scientific acumen. Well, that said, when I went to the tomb and I stood there right in front of the tomb, there was a group of Chinese Catholics, there was a very large group of Chinese Catholics who were standing beside me, and they were praying Wan Fu Maria, Hail Mary. And as I listened, I just had a sense that they weren't from the so-called Patriotic Association. And I chatted with these Catholics. And for them, and I'll probably talk about this again in a moment, for them, Matteo Ricci brought them the Mass. For them, Matteo Ricci brought them the lives of the saints. For the Chinese Catholics in China, Ricci brought them the faith and the truth.